Good morning. Welcome to Museum Connection Inspiration Conference. I'm Claire Delongeau, the Director of Museum Connection. Thank you for being with us today. Today, we will talk about regrowth and reimagination of exhibition, or how we can rethink the model of temporary and traveling exhibition. I would like to thank Alistair Hudson, Director at the Whitworth and Manchester Art Gallery, and Loic FEL, co-founder of the COAL Foundation, for giving us their vision today. A special thanks to our moderator, Manon DELAURY. Manon is the founder of TEO, the Touring Exhibition Organization, the platform dedicated to the International Touring Exhibition. Two quick information. This conference is connected to a new offer at Museum Connection. In January 2022, during the event in Paris, we will propose for the first time a touring pavilion organized in partnership with TEO and presenting some major actors in the touring industry. You'll find all the information on our website. Then a more practical information. We will spend around 30 minutes with our speaker today, and you will then have the possibility to join a private meeting room per speaker to ask your question. Simply click on the name of the speaker you'd like to talk with. Then Manon, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everyone. And many thanks to you, Claire, to you and your team for organizing this conference about exhibitions. I'm very happy to be with you today. So the purpose of our session today is to consider exhibitions with a particular focus on temporary and traveling exhibitions in the context of a cultural world that is being shaken, questioned, and reshaped by the multi-layered crisis that has impacted our world since last year. Not only with pandemics, but also with anti-racism movements, decolonizing, and sustainable development challenges, blending and even sometimes accelerating each other. The pandemic has shaken our world of exhibitions in an unprecedented manner, drastically reducing the possibilities of traveling and visiting places of culture in the first place. It had strong impact on a global scale in the short term, with exhibitions being cancelled, rescheduled, moved online, and resources for exhibitions often being put under strong pressure. But we can see how impact is also for the long term, with exhibition models being more profoundly questioned, especially the traditional blockbuster model, which has been so important for a long time in temporary and traveling exhibitions. So how can exhibition models be reimagined within that fast evolving context to remain relevant? How can they be transformed so they can make sense within their human ecosystem, within their natural ecosystems, and of course their economic ecosystems? Well, that's the question we'll address today with our two guests, who I'm delighted to welcome. Loic FEL, the co-founder of the COAL Foundation, a coalition for art and sustainable development, and Alistair Hudson, the director of the Whitworth Gallery and the Manchester Art Gallery. So Loic and Alistair, thanks for joining us today. I guess the first question I would like to ask you is, who are you? So maybe Alistair, could you tell us a little bit about you and your organization?
Yes, hi, thanks for having me here. Yeah, so I'm the director of the Whitworth, which is part of the University of Manchester. It's a large art gallery set in a park, which was established in 1889 as Manchester grew as an industrial city. And Manchester Art Gallery is part of the City Council. It's part of the civic infrastructure of the city. And it is right in the city centre. Both have collections of about 60,000 works of art, which also ranges into textiles, designs, ceramics, and so on. Quite strange collections, and they're not they're not really an A to Z of the history of art. They are collections of collections that were created by philanthropists in the 19th century originally for social purpose, because they were about education, about improving lives, about trying to shape a city and the consciousness and the imagination of the residents of the city to kind of give them a healthy life and a healthy mind and a healthy body. So very much embedded in a different history of art, which is not necessarily about making a spectacle, but is about improving living conditions in opposition to industrialization. And that was something that's always been very interesting to me, is the social function of art. And so therefore, we're sort of reimagining these museums at the moment to really play up that social function rather than making them tourist attractions.
And exhibitions then.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alistair. Loic, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about COAL?
Yes, COAL began 12 years ago, and we are dedicated to promote a new culture and share this culture with the exhibitions and the artists. Probably the main purpose and the main action is the COAL Prize. Every year we promote a prize dedicated to a project for an artist, and it's a way to identify a lot of artists and projects around the world dedicated to this topic. And we make exhibitions for great events like the Congrès Mondial de la Nature, Worldwide Congress for Nature, for example, or the COP15 in Paris. And we work with European organization in cultural area to promote the sustainability inside the cultural organizations and the cultural teams, like exhibition, but not only for the good functionment and reduction of carbon footprint for the cultural industries.
So you have two very different and interesting, innovating frameworks for exhibition making. So within these exhibition making frameworks, how have you guys been impacted by the crisis? Telling us a little bit about the impact, and then could you tell us how you adapted, if you innovated, and if you developed new practices which you feel will be here to last? Alistair, would you like to answer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like many museums, we were closed for a long time. We've been severely impacted in terms of finances, in terms of numbers of people now coming to the museum. So, the crisis has impacted us like it has everybody else. But it gave us a time, I think, to rethink what we were doing and what we were trying to achieve, and what was the point of having an art gallery? What was the point of having a museum? What was the point of doing exhibitions? And I wouldn't say it changed what we were doing, but it accelerated what we were doing, because I think the pandemic exposed the fissures and cracks in society, the inequalities, in wealth, in health, in education, all these things. It really exposed the problems we have, and I'm very interested in how we use a museum to address those. So what we have been doing is thinking about accelerating our process of change, which is about essentially repurposing our museum in practical ways so that it starts to serve this function in wider city life, rather than just within the confines of the white wall of the museum. And underpinning this, I suppose, is a philosophy which is embedded in there's a project I've been involved in for a long time called Arte Útil with Tanya Bruguera, which is the idea of art as a tool. And this is really underpinning our thinking about creating a museum which is created by people, for people, and starts to have these social functions. So, for example, one exhibition space at Manchester Art Gallery, we've now turned into a centre for working with clinicians and the health service to develop children before school, so families with children aged 0 to 5, and it's a developmental centre working with health professionals, but it uses the collection in new innovations in how to monitor and encourage child development leading up to school. There's another space at the Whitworth which we are turned into the Collections Care Centre, which is basically a kind of health centre, which will be permanent. We have turned another exhibition space into a school, which now will be basically running alternative classes for children in the city who don't necessarily have, they don't succeed in conventional education. Also we are involved in, I suppose, wider projects, for example, in the park itself outside the gallery, which we are now, where we run a natural cultural health service, but we are redesigning the park so that it actually performs all these functions with growing spaces, with gardens, with prototype housing for new model housing, social housing for the city, with education spaces and so on. So it's really about starting to redefine the functions of the museum and to bring the world into the museum, and to take the museum into the world, so they're truly integrated. And this is about kind of going from this representational idea of art being just a picture of something or pointing at a problem, to actually doing something about it and being involved in the world, so that people can actually realize that this is something that is embedded in their life on a regular basis, rather than something they might just do every month or every 6 weeks.
Could you give us an example of how you engage with local communities, maybe with the Grace and Perry exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, the Grace and Perry exhibition was created through a TV show on national TV, where during lockdown, Grayson did kind of art classes every week on the show, and people sent in the work they'd made, and basically he curated a show from all this work that was sent from around the country. And we now have this exhibition basically of the story of lockdown, and I suppose how people discovered art in this when they were stripped of everything else. I think people realized that they actually needed art in their lives in all kinds of ways. So that in a way is a kind of I suppose a model, a prototype of co-making show, or what I would call kind of the constituent-led form of exhibition making, where you make shows with people. But what's quite interesting is now what's happening is that people are coming to us. We're developing concepts for exhibitions with people through long-term conversations. So we just opened an exhibition last week at the Whitworth called Still Parents, which is the result of 2 years of working with families who had experienced child loss, prenatal and neonatal child loss, where they've been using the collection and making art as part of the kind of therapeutic recovery, or a way of dealing with their situation. And that was now an exhibition of that work, but it's part of the work that is now ongoing and embedded in the National Health Service.
Wow, that's very unique as an approach. Thanks for sharing that, Alistair. Loic, could you tell us how your activities have been impacted by the crisis and how you guys have been managing to get through that?
Like everybody in the cultural area, everything was cancelled. We didn't have anything to do. And that was a good news at the end, because all cultural organizations in France was in the same situation, and they finally have time to consider sustainability. So what we made and started the first confinement was lockdown was to create a formation, a school dedicated to integration of sustainability in the cultural organization. And we started with our traditional and habitual contact, because we're working more in fine art and contemporary art, so the museum. But the interesting point was that we didn't work only with museum anymore, because other cultural organizations heard about our formations and asked for them. So this year we were working with all the national orchestra for the same methodology, and the National Organization for Dance. in all the territories. So the interesting point was first that they had time to consider sustainability and had time to propose a new organization inside the museums and so the theater, etc. And the second point is that the different artistical sector working together. And for example, in Rennes, in Britain, we are working with the Federation of Local Museum and with the National Orchestra of Rennes. And we propose not only to share tools and methodology for sustainability, but at the end, it make the possibility to have a cultural project together, artistical project. So we start with a very technical consideration, like transportation, food, and the publics, etc. And working together, we had ideas for an artistical project. And at the end, it became not only a technical approach, but a cultural project too.
Do you feel that this transition is kind of a long-term wide change, or is it just like an opportunistic moment where people feel like they should try a little bit?
I guess it's the both, sadly. The new thing after the French local elections is that the Green become stronger and are really critical about the public money. And the rule is to dedicate the money to the action, the benefit to the maximum number of people. So that's why, for example, the opera and the theater are considered as a huge money investment and not for enough public. So the local authority finance this cultural sector and ask them to propose something new, to have more public and a new proposition, like a new format to approach new publics. It's that, or they have any more money. And
okay.
In the same movement, the local authority ask to carbon footprint reduction for the cultural sector. So that's the obligation and opportunistic situation. But working on that, the different people consider that finally it's not only make less with less, but maybe an opportunity to make new and better, and it could be happy. So it's the interesting point, but at the start point, it was complicated. I remember, for example, when France adopted COP21 in 2015, the big museum don't wanted to make programmation about sustainability or climate change at this period, because 2 years before the event, we approached all the museum to propose a common program for the COP21. And at this period, the British Museum didn't want to consider this topic as an artistical topic. They say that they are national museum, they are serious about art, so it's not their subject. But 5 years later, we remarked that the national museums and big museum integrate the sustainability not only in their functionment, because that's an obligation to have money from the cultural ministry, but in their artistical proposals too. So I guess the movement is enclenched, is at the start point, and it will be the norm for the future.
That sounds good. Beyond your actual practice and the activities that you guys have been developing to adapt, are there any inspiring adaptations or innovations that you guys have been noticing in the industry? Alistair?
Yeah, there's maybe a couple, far and near, perhaps. I've been quite impressed with the Queen's Museum in New York, which is obviously based in some very deprived neighborhoods in the city. And like a lot of American museums, which are very heavily dependent on ticket entry and the income from those, they had a real crisis in American museums. But the Queen's Museum really kind of embraced this and said, right, we're going to respond and work with our neighborhood. And they created this thing called the Year of Uncertainty, where they said, we don't know what's going to happen. All we're going to do is we're going to work with the people around us. So they work with a whole range of community partners and organizations, and they were distributing kind of food parcels and food programs and education programs for local schools, turning the exhibition spaces over to artists in the neighborhood so that they could have spaces and work. So it became a much more kind of operational institution, but with this idea that they don't know what's going to happen next, which I quite like. In a world of museums, yes, where, you know, planning is everything and exhibitions are nailed down 4 or 5 years in advance. I think this was quite refreshing to see. And then closer to home, I'm actually in an organization visiting it at the moment, but it's actually a pub in the English countryside, which closed down. It was a community pub in a small village that's closed down, and the organization Crises Arts worked with the local community to buy the pub. They fundraised with local shareholders and using a kind of a special bond scheme, and they bought the pub and they're turning it into yeah, well, you can see, look, I'm in the bar. There you go.
Brilliant.
And they're running it as a pub, but also as an art project. So, you know, the paintings on the walls are real paintings, and but more than this, there are craft studios, the workshops, there's accommodation, artist residencies, farming, and all the food is made in the locality from local suppliers. All the cups, the plates, the jugs. Everything you eat is made by artists and local people. So it's really a kind of holistic integration of art and life. Yeah, and to see that transition for an organization to be able to do that very rapidly in the space of a year has been, yeah, it's quite impressive.
That's very interesting, and how what you were trying to do as well in your organization, we can see it in those organizations as well, kind of opening the doors and really truly getting out there and having a dialogue rather than just a one-way conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out that, I mean, I've been considering this for a long time, that the idea of the exhibition in art was something that was really created, you know, in the middle of the 19th century. It's quite a recent idea, the idea of the exhibition, and for me, it's complicit with, you know, our current inherited economic, you know, system. And I think as we go into a new era, which is less Eurocentric, which is less you know, kind of working within the problems of capitalism and is more global, I think it's time to rethink how we work with art and look at the longer history of art and how it's always worked as an integrated model in an ecology or an ecosystem of the world, rather than the confined space of the museum per se. I mean, I still like exhibitions, but yeah, I think we should always challenge ourselves about why we're doing this.
Definitely rethink the exhibition, the model. We'll get back to that after. Thank you very much, Alistair. Loic, did you come across any appealing, inspiring practices in the industry as well, in France or internationally?
There's a lot, but the important point, I guess, was the first lockdown changed everything in terms of perception. It means previously our lives was geographically organized. The local for culture, the local for work, the local for home, and in one day everything was in the same space. Our computer and our local room. It changed everything because for the first time we didn't have any frontier between the area of lives. And the museums, opera, and so on make video on YouTube, you know, a really short spectacle in the lockdown and so on, and they touch new public. it's not only to maintain the link with their public, but new public. And all cultural organizations try a lot of innovation to propose to access to the culture in the lockdown. And some of their innovation make a real transformation for our professional culture because we didn't consider anymore that the exhibition is the only way to show art, and not the only way to have an economic model. We can use the exhibition, of course, but not as the only way, and complete the proposition with new service and new proposal with or without economic model to propose and to promote the culture to a lot of diverse public. And that's a more important thing. The day I understand that everything will change is when one of our national museum decided to show artworks and old masterpiece in a mall, because the mall was still open, and they proposed to do that to maintain the link. But 2 points interesting in this exceptional event is that new people saw the art, and local people didn't know the museum and was never in the museum. So it was like a new communication for them. And the museum accepts to show art outside the museum. And it's really new for the very conservative French administration.
That's extremely interesting. What about the you mentioned to me the tour, the European tour that was performed by the National Orchestra. Would you like to talk about this?
Oh, it's a project, but a very interesting one. When we are working with the National Organization of National Orchestra, so all the orchestra, some orchestra propose to work on a project, and it's the Philharmonie in Paris, the Residency Orchestre Nationale d'Île-de-France. They wanted to propose an European tour by train. And it's a really new way to organize a tour, because they didn't ask the big city with the big opera to receive one representation, but the starting point is the possibility we trained. So we quit Paris, where are we going? And after, where are we going? And so for each city, they find a place to make concerts. So not only in the National Opera and the really prestigious place, and it's a way to reimagine the tour in a sustainable way, but it's a way to consider all the place and new publics too. So the both subjects are together. It's a matter of price and public money, because it's really expensive to make an exhibition. It's a matter of social and access to culture, and it's a matter of sustainability as ecological way, of course.
That's really interesting, and in terms of the human adventure that it implies as well. So that's a great example, and we can definitely transpose it to a traveling exhibition. I think that sounds like a very inspiring model. So now, do you guys think that the exhibition model as we know it is kind of obsolete, and in particular, is the Blockbuster dead now? Alistair, would you like to give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think the Blockbuster will probably live on, but I certainly would like to challenge it. I mean, I'm less interested in doing Blockbuster exhibitions now and thinking of working with exhibitions in this operational model. But nonetheless, we are doing an exhibition at the Whitworth in 2023 called Economics the Blockbuster, which is an ironic title because it's an exhibition about the least blockbuster-friendly subject ever. But in a way, it is about unraveling these world systems and saying, well, let's pull this apart and start again and look at other ways in which we can operate. So I kind of see it as the show to end all shows. And then beyond that, we don't know what will happen. But I certainly think also the kind of ecological impact of Blockbuster exhibitions really needs to be considered, partly in terms of the kind of the traffic of tourism, the impact that has, the huge kind of energy consumption required to make some of these shows that we've done historically. So we started in a way, started to merge exhibitions. So for example, next we have a Suzanne Lacey exhibition, which is in this operational way called What Kind of City, which is asking the question, how do we remake the city, and working with people to actually produce the exhibition. But then the exhibition infrastructure will be used by the next show, okay. So that you're not pulling down walls and building new walls and remaking the gallery, which is what happens every time, which is extremely wasteful. So I think that sort of modulation of certainly how we're doing exhibitions within the gallery is going to be quite interesting to see a kind of much more organic evolution of the way we show and work with art and artists, rather than kind of creating these, these kind of great edifices which have to be constantly pulled down and put back up again. And the transport implications as well are huge with shows like that.
Sure. Thank you, Alistair. Loic, what do you think? Do you think we can kind of reinvent the model?
Yeah, maybe, but the problem is that the more successful are an exhibition, the more they are attractive for public from far away. And that's the difficult point, because if we take the carbon footprint conclusion of the Musée du Louvre, for example, 19.9% of the carbon footprint is the travel of the visitors. Because they come from far away. And so the blockbusters could be a model only if it's the exhibition they go to meet the public and know the contrary. So the tour for once could be an ecological way to do huge exhibitions, but I guess it's not the future, because it's more secure to capitalize on the local public and make exhibitions with long time of preparation, long time of exhibition, and we are to work on that way. But the public transportation is still the huge topic for local exhibition too. And the interesting point on this point of view and this area is to work with other tourist and culture organization in the same city. I explain, if you go to a city or something only for one exhibition, all of the carbon footprint from the visitor count for the exhibition. But if you go for an exhibition and the restaurant and a spectacle and a conference or something else, we mutualize the travel of the visitor. So we had to work not only alone and in the eco-conception of the exhibition, it's very important, of course, but we can make that in a new relation with the public and new proposals with friends, and not only in the cultural area, to organize the travel in a more efficient way.
Certainly, it's interesting to see that actually traveling exhibitions which sound super challenging for the environment, might have some angles to be a solution as well for the protection of our environment. And we can clearly see with both your input that we need to really see it as an ecosystem and not challenge the models on their own. So that's extremely interesting. Thank you so much, Alistair and Loic, for your input. It was extremely interesting to see these great insights about innovative approaches to the making of exhibitions. I feel like we're at the beginning of reinventing, and it will be super key for us to witness and challenge what's going to happen in the coming months on the trail of COVID, seeing how institutions all around the world can reinvent themselves in that dialogue with their ecosystem, and particularly with their human ecosystem. Thank you so much for taking part in this presentation today. I'd like to now maybe give the mic back to Claire so that she will explain to us how we can now move to the chat rooms.
Yes, you'll see on your screen three names, Manon, Alistair, Loic, and you can just choose the room where you'd like to go. And you can then switch from one room to another, okay? On your screen, you should have the information on how it will be at home or at your office on your screen. So just choose the room you'd like to join and ask your question.
Um,
Yeah.